Hello, everyone. I hope you have your coffee or your tea, as is our usual ritual here. And here we are with Reverend David William Parry. He's out there in beautiful London, the ancient Londonium. Although he's not actually within the square mile, but he's in the proximity of King's College, London. Yeah, he's near campus, one of the main campuses of King's College, London, and he's always a wealth of insight. I have here within reach copies of his books: Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, and Caliban's Redemption, and The Grammar of Witchcraft, which is a Shakespearean study, the Caliban's Redemption being some of his inspired poetry, his ruminations. And I was so busy, I'd forgotten to send David a link. So I got me a little behind schedule here, but that's okay. And here's my books: The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the true Rosicrucian Order. And the sequel to that, The Arcana of Light on the Path, which is a meditative tool of sorts. And within these, of course, is included many esoteric cosmological diagrams that can help you in your deciphering the symbology of the Christian mysteries in the context of world evolution as a whole. And we've been having a conversation that's ongoing here, and this is our 16th episode. That's 2 times 8. And so that's good that we've been able to keep it together this long. David, how are you?
Good afternoon, my friend. Yeah, sort of reasonably well, a bit flagging more than usual. I hope this show goes on forever. I think we've got to franchise it or something. Because I'm sure you and I can keep it up. We've just got back from opening Valentine's Hall, which of course is an MCC Oasis group, hopefully on its way to becoming the only MCC, Metropolitan Community Church, in South London. We're based in Balham, and we had the opening service today, which I wanted to be, reflective and like Quaker program worship, very zen, very calming. But it seems to have been a stack of work for myself and my other half. So we've literally rushed back to be on my favourite show and my favourite Sunday thing to do, apart from being in the presence of Christ Jesus and talking to your good self. So I think London is beautiful, but you have to be in the right tax bracket to fully enjoy it, particularly nowadays. Got the proximity of King's College. Do I think of it that way? I mean, they used to have halls of residence in my lovely Clapham. Clapham, of course, is the home of the Clapham sect, William Wilberforce and the abolition of slavery and all that sort of stuff, which I'm very proud of. I mean, on the common, literally 10 minutes from me as I'm sat here, is the church the Clapham sect used to worship in, and where William Wilberforce used to go on a Sunday morning. So I'm very proud of that. King's College, they sold all their assets in this part of London a few years ago now to give one of their rectors, one of the deans, a house, I hear. My God, have these people no shame at all? Not to raise anybody's salary, but to give the executives a boost. But yeah, I mean, I'm my first university was King's. Somebody told me after the course, why did you spend 3 years in a bad mood? And that's a very good question. I think at King's College, your face either fits or it didn't. Mine didn't. I admit it. Mine didn't. Crazy LGBT radical storms traditional England. Yeah, the Anglican Church. So no, it didn't. There we are. But I respect it. My God, John, some of the scholars they had in those days were the real McCoy. I'm thinking of people like Colin Gunton, a massive brain and scriptural scholar. And so so in certain ways some things change and nothing changes. I remember all the faculty absolutely being terrified of Colin Gunton the minute he entered the room because he knew the facts, he knew the dates, and he knew what to say. So they were always on the back foot and worried whenever he came in. And nowadays they've got nothing to say at all. Like most of them, then only there are no Colin Guntons now. Colin, if you're still in this world, my respects to you. Sort of. I don't apologise. Yeah, radical. There we are, radical, but not as radical as my friend John Barnum, who keeps it quiet, who keeps his radicalism quiet beneath the veneer of the American gentleman, which I respect and admire so much. And I think we have more productive conversations than I'd ever have had with him. Oh, there's one other chap that I didn't get on with too well in those days, Professor Keith Ward, who was the head of religious studies. My first degree was actually in comparative religion because I wanted to see what everybody else had to say. I knew the Christian tradition. What are all these other buggers talking about? And I found some amazing material. But he'd been a vicar, Anglican vicar. He didn't like radicalism, although you can't help feeling from the last couple of books of his I read that either he's some sort of closet Hegelian, or he wants to be some sort of Hindu sannyasin sat under the bo tree waiting for enlightenment. So I could never get the gist of him really. But respects to you, Keith, if you ever see this. But yeah, Colin, either of you, Colin and Keith, not a patch on John Barnwell, and that I can promise. Handing back to you.
And here we are. There's the pumpkin I carved yesterday, and his smiling face there to scare all the goblins away. And so we've been enjoying the wonderful Halloween season, although we didn't get that many trick-or-treaters. But I'm ready for anything right as it stands right now. Let me put on my garb, and I'll fill you all in. Ever since I've been co-opted by the other side, who'd believe it? Anyways, it's hard to get this thing off, but I don't want to scare anybody, so I'll take it off because it's very scary. So yeah, we've been trying to manage our spookiness here back in the States, and I might as well get it over with. Consequently, we're enjoying ourselves, and it's a wonderful festival that's good for the kids. Although there wasn't that many kids out because of all the fear tactics that are running around the world as of late. But it's amazing that the flu disappeared, and as did the common cold. And I guess it got sucked into the statistics. But I don't want to get into talking about all that. But what would be interesting to me, I tend to try and share things that I'm personally looking at. And what I've been reviewing lately is 3 particular lecture cycles that I've mentioned: Occult Movements in the 19th Century by Rudolf Steiner, and The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness, and then a later lecture cycle, Eternal and Transient Elements, The Cosmic Past of Humanity, and The Mystery of Evil. Given that at our current state of history, we're staring it right in the face. I mean, we have before us the most awesome level of technological development that gives the elites that are in charge of it a sense of being all powerful, not knowing how minuscule their power is. It's actually just an illusion, an apparition, as it were, in fitting with the holiday season. Because as we've discussed on our previous episodes, that the materialistic utilitarian view is so limited in its capacity to be able to comprehend the world in which we live, because it only concerns itself with basically the mechanistic understanding of the world, of which that's just like the substrata of the universe, and that it doesn't admit the existence of the higher levels of inspiration that can intervene within human evolution, and do intervene, although we may not choose to notice it. I mean, there's great cases in history. One example would be Joan of Arc, who was so instrumental in bringing about the separation of the French folk soul from the British folk soul. And in fact, she was burned at the stake with the utmost bravery on her part. She was burned at the stake at a church in Normandy that was actually partially, some of the wings were constructed by one of my ancestors. So it's an interesting, weird karmic twist. And he was a master mason there, and he's responsible for some beautiful work on the abbey, is what it's called, actually. And so if we could look at this mood of soul that can get us past some of this apparitional darkness, then it would be a good thing. And I happen to have brought up here somewhere something I started into on another episode, trying to recite it from memory, but as I didn't have it committed, because I used to recite it, but it's been many years, I'm going to share with you a very enchanting Halloween mood excerpt from the short story Carcassonne by Lord Dunsany, a distant relative of mine. And in a while came Arleon back to the king's right hand, and raised his harp and chanted, and told of Carcassonne. Far away it was, and far away, a city of gleaming ramparts rising one over the other, and marble terraces behind the ramparts, and fountains shimmering on the terraces. To Carcassonne the elf kings with their fairies at first retreated from men, and had built it on an evening late in May by blowing their elfin horns. Carcassonne, Carcassonne. Travelers had seen it sometimes like a clear dream, with the sun glittering on its citadel upon a far-off hilltop, and then the clouds had come, or a sudden mist. No one had seen it long or come quite close to it, though there were once some men that came very near, and the smoke from the houses blew into their faces, a sudden gust, no more, and these declared that someone was burning cedarwood there. Men had dreamed that there is a witch there, walking alone through the cold courts and corridors of Marmorian palaces, fearfully beautiful still for all her 80 centuries, singing the second oldest song, which was taught her by the sea, shedding tears for loneliness from eyes that would madden armies, yet she will not call her dragons home. Carcassonne is terribly guarded. Sometimes she swims in a marble bath through whose deeps a river tumbles, or lies all morning on the edge of it to dry slowly in the sun, and watches the heaving river trouble the deeps of the bath. It flows through the caverns of earth for further than she knows, and coming to light in the witch's bath, goes down through the earth again to its own peculiar sea. In autumn sometimes it comes down black with snow that spring has molten in unimagined mountains, or withered blooms of mountain shrubs go beautifully by. When there is blood in the bath, she knows there is war in the mountains, and yet she knows not where those mountains are. When she sings, the fountain stands up from the dark earth. When she combs her hair, they say there are storms at sea. When she is angry, the wolves go brave, and all come down to the byres. When she is sad, the sea is sad, and both are sad forever. Carcassonne, Carcassonne. This city is the fairest of the wonders of the morning. The sun shouts when he beholdeth it. The Carcassonne evening weepeth when evening passeth away. That's from 1917. And there we have it. I almost got through it. So when you look at that whole image, and that's the idea of terror, Rudolf Steiner makes the point, which is very interesting. He said that the worldview of materialistic science is born out of fear. And that's something that one can contemplate, as I've contemplated it for many, many years. And you see that there's this whole distance from the depth of reality. It's a shrinking away into the smallest form of human consciousness, just merely the life of the senses as comprehended by abstract thinking. And so when you get into Rudolf Steiner's worldview and you see that he talks about the Luciferic fallen angels and then the Ahrimanic fallen angels as a polarity, and that the Christ impulse is that which finds a balance between those two extremes. And so the materialism is the Ahriman or satanic realm, and the Luciferic realm is that false light that gave us the individual breaking away from the realms of paradise. And so he says to antidote these two extremes, for the Luciferic, the antidote is humility. For the Ahrimanic, the antidote in that realm is to be satisfied in your present situation. And there's no better example in history than Joan of Arc being burned at the stake and being absolutely comfortable with it, much like Jacques de Molay, who was burned with Jean Tourniac on the no, not Jean Tourniac. He's an author. With another fellow, they were burned at the stake on the Ile-de-France in Paris. As Templar leaders, they were taken down by Philip le Bel, the worshipper of the gold. And he was obviously taking the wrong inspiration from the gold, because it was that impulse of mammon, the straight up power and money and all of that that's swirling so strongly around the City of London, Inc., the Square Mile, and around Washington, D.C., Inc., and around Vatican, Inc. So there's all these incorporate entities that want to grab the powers of the world. It's like Judas with his pieces of silver, and it's that fallen realm of the metals that we're looking at here. And so if we could like steel our resolve with that humility and with that acceptance of our circumstances, that gives one the strength to smile in the face of adversaries. And I think that's where I'm striving to live, although I fail often. Nonetheless, I get back in the ship and I head into the wind.
I think we all fail often. I mean, the human condition is the human condition. We are fallen beings, whatever that means. What matters is the orientation. And it strikes me that London nowadays is oriented towards the limiting and the bad and the selfish. People need to be oriented to the good so they have goodwill. When people forget goodwill or turn their backs on goodwill, societies, civilizations, and churches collapse, because the Spirit is no longer there. If any church turns away people of goodwill, then they are no longer the church, whether they realize that or not. Gosh, I'm just about to say something very uncharitable, actually. Of course, Boris Johnson gave a speech, a press conference yesterday evening to the nation on Halloween. So I hope people realize he was giving a scary speech on Halloween about how London has to go back into lockdown for a month starting this coming Thursday. To me, what was that movie? Or was it a comic book? Or maybe both? He looked like the Scarecrow coming and giving bad news and rattling about. And, everything had been leaked beforehand by the awful Michael Gove. Michael Gove, just go away. Gove, go. Gove, go. You're an unpleasant, horrible, selfish man. Go away. But not nearly as frightening as Hancock, who is clearly carving up the cabinet and waiting for his shot at the top. So what appears to have happened is I'm trying not to laugh, I'm sorry, John. There was a leak which obviously came from high places, and it appears to have been Michael Gove and Hancock in concert, deliberately trying to undermine the Prime Minister and assert their authority. What authority? You're members of the cabinet. You're not they're not the Prime Minister. Though, of course, they both think they might be. And, we're back into this farcical situation where cases, why can't they work out the difference between infections and cases? But, let's not get to logic. Let's not bother with that. Across London, actually, infections are falling at the moment, if their own stats are to be believed. But let's go into lockdown anyway and destroy business, because that really seems to be what this is all about. It's the Tory party, not the old traditional paternalistic lot. I'm not a Tory, I'm not a right-winger, but at least I can understand them. The landed gentry who feel God has put them in a particular position to look after poor people. I resent that way of thinking bitterly, but at least I can understand it. And there's something, there's a sort of goodwill behind that. What's that? I never sing it, all things bright and beautiful. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. Yeah, says who? But, at least I can understand that point of view. I'm on the side of Thomas Jefferson and all of those horrible people that started America that thought, take that, kingy, take that, kingy. No rich man at his castle and poor man at his gate, take that. So on the side of George Washington and all the rest of these malcontents that started the wonderful, blessed experiment known as America. And without them, where on earth would we all be? Anyway, Boris Johnson got upstaged by members of his own cabinet. So we're all going back into lockdown, even though the WHO is now not sure it's working. And there'll be a huge amount of pain and problems, mental sicknesses, suicides, the elderly, and all of the groups that are really being affected badly are going to be affected worse. And local businesses are closing left, right, and centre. I see business after business closing in Clapham. So, is it a corporate takeover bid? I know a dear friend of mine, Vladimir Wiedemann, says, oh, come on, that's conspiracy theory. But it's not. The Chinese, in their infinite, inscrutable wisdom, have a lot of interests in the corporates, and this is a corporate attack on the British High Street. The end. Speaking about Joan of Arc, is that the Brit coming out in me? I'm not ever sure she's on the same level as a Jacques de Molay. And I remember reading Margaret Murray, where an incredible book. I can't remember the name of the book on her. And I'm not taking away from Joan of Arc. I mean, I think she was an incredible person and actually performed the necessary act of surgery by separating French-British interests from French-French interests. I think that is very, very interesting and timely, and I agree 100% that those are the folk souls coming into a new condition of orientation, which was necessary for both sides. But I don't know, there were lots of pagan elements in that, and I'm sympathetic to certain types of paganism because that's nature worship. Who can say the spirit isn't in nature? But when she started wearing men's clothes, I remember Margaret Murray talking about that, and these, excuse me, these mysterious voices. I mean, what exactly were they, and what were they saying? So, for me, more than the Gnostics, and of course, as someone influenced by Valentinian Gnosticism quite deeply, I don't, as I say, it might be the Brit in me. I'm never sure about this particular issue. I'm never sure that she fits in that category, or is it some sort of resurgence of the pagan feminine, which is equally interesting, but just not in the same spiritual current. And I remember reading something supplementary to that, which was fascinating. When the English authorities had arrested her and imprisoned her, they insisted she wear women's clothes. And then, but who knows? Is it ideology creeping into the documents? Who knows? Probably. Then she became more feminine. And when she refound her resolve before facing the trial yet again, she refused the feminine clothes and was wearing men's clothes. And apparently she was resolute after that and standing up against the English prosecutors. I find that fascinating. And that for me is highly suggestive, I suppose, not only of a sort of feminist assertion in periods. There's nothing new, is there? A feminist assertion way back when, but also maybe a neo-pagan assertion. I mean, these voices were heard under trees, weren't they? So you're dealing with something, I think, in Europe that's quite recognizable and equally fascinating, don't get me wrong, but not quite for me in the Gnostic current. I don't know what you think about that, John. I'm handing it back to you.
Yeah, well, actually, it was Geoffrey de Charny that was burned at the stake next to Jacques de Molay in 1314, and under the orders of Philip le Bel, or known as Philip le Fair. But as to Joan of Arc, she's interesting because Rudolf Steiner does comment on her and about her significance in separating the French folk soul from the British folk soul. And that's important to understand. But he also puts her within the context of like the oracles, right? The oracles of ancient Greece, and that's like a hearkening back to an older form of consciousness that whereas that the experience is coming in from outside. And he said that since we've made our transition into this modern age of the consciousness soul, the fifth post-Atlantean period, where we have to unfortunately stare evil straight in the face as a result of our materialistic disposition and our abstract modality, we lose touch, at least for a brief period of time, with the inspiration of the divine worlds. But that's in preparation, because as we move further back in the past, it becomes more and more significant that there was a clairvoyant relationship to the etheric world of life as streaming in from outside. But Rudolf Steiner had made the point that it was necessary that we be separated off from our relationship to this experience and able to consolidate ourselves as individual beings, and that the future etheric clairvoyance would arise from within rather than as something streaming in from outside of one, which is a very interesting and thoughtful perspective on it. And one could think about that again for many, many years. But Joan of Arc is a turning point, a very key turning point in history, as was the event of the Knights Templar, which is so greatly misunderstood, because when you look at the actual Templar stream, which is something I deal with so extensively in my book, it's really the central theme, is that stream, that Christian mystery stream that flowed from the crucifixion and resurrection, to the Gnostic impulses that were lifted up by the angels and came down as cosmic intelligence in the 9th century, and then leading from there into the Knights Templar and into the true Rosicrucian Order. And yet you see a lot of descriptions today that attempt to demonize the Templar stream, as if something that came out of the result of the torture of the Knights Templar as a result of their doppelgangers spewing forth testimony that there's something like evil or demonic beneath the surface of the Templar stream, when really, yeah, there's individuals, as there always is. There's those people that fall into darkness that we all know. We've done it ourselves. But nonetheless, Rudolf Steiner describes that the initiates within the Templar stream, and of which there were quite many, they'd renounced the worldly goods, even though the Templars had some of the greatest possessions in the world. They were at the service of the order, and they had hostels put all over the domains to where people could travel safely. And if you wanted to, like, say, send money to your cousin in Jerusalem, you could give it to the Templars, and they would just send a note that would go to Jerusalem. It had a seal on it and all that, and your cousin could receive the money, so that you wouldn't have to have a robbery occur in transition. So there were important things. That was the foundation of the banking industry. But like many good institutions, it was taken by the lower forces. That's what they tend to do. And so a lot of the venerable institutions and various groupings of people have been demonized as a result of factions serving the shadow, taking them and stealing them and using them for their own uses. Much akin to what has happened to the Jewish people that have got demonized as a result of the Sabbateans, the Sapkai and the antinomial impulse, where they revere the concept of sinning. And it's just like an inversion, and they were excommunicated from Judaism, but Judaism to this day gets blamed for everything that occurs as a result of the activities of those people. Likewise, the Knights Templar, they receive this weird treatment. I even saw a series on Netflix about the Turkish Empire and all that, and then they portrayed the Knights Templar as these like weird demon worshipping horrible people, and it's just like, boy, it just doesn't end, does it? So we have to deal with all these things, and since we're trying to present here maybe things that one might consider as a means for opening up one's questions to find out what is truth. And so I like to think that that's what we're doing here. And if I'm wrong, please correct me.
No, actually, I think we stick very clearly to what is truth. As I said in one of my addresses at Valentine's Hall, which was live streamed. We believe in good with a capital G, beauty with a capital B, and truth with a capital T. And I think you and I have managed to form a very telling dialogue about that. And more power to us. More power to us. I've always loved this time of year. I've always loved it. I love Halloween. Isn't that terrible? I'll probably be chased out of town now. I've always loved Halloween. Even when people put on, is that the Scream by Monk, or is that an alien? Even when people put on scary masks, I prefer that one to that bloody thing from Alien. That bloody thing from Alien really irritates me. I like the scary mask better. I've always loved Halloween. I love this time of year. It's my favourite time of year. Apple bobbing, Brits will know about that, and bonfires and feasting and all that sort of stuff. Yes, it leads to All Souls. I mean, I think it's the same sort of thing. I mean, the pagans would have called Halloween Samhain, or Samhain, which of course is the Celtic way of saying the Feast of Sacrifices, by which they meant if there were ailing or elderly livestock, excuse me, they would be sacrificed and eaten by the local village at this particular time. And it was, you know, the sacrifice of the harvest. The fields had made the sacrifice of giving their bounty to the local community. I think that's very important too. I suppose on reflection, it's really the sort of slightly, you know, overgrown, overripe bounty of this time of the year that's always fascinated me, with its luxuriance, with its staggering beauty. You know, the one poetic moment of genius that I can think of in American vernacular is calling the autumn the fall. That is truly poetic. You know, golden leaves everywhere. I can see exactly where that phrase came from. That's beautiful. No, I mean, but it's All Souls, of course, where the Christian version, or maybe it's a continuum, maybe it's the same thing, where we remember our ancestors. There may be saints in our family. Don't judge family. You never know what you're dealing with, really. Only God knows. Don't judge your friends. Only God knows. Maybe we know saints. Maybe saints have been amongst us all the time. So that's when you remember ancestors and their gifts and family and their gifts. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful magical time. In terms of, I don't think magical times entered the life and career of Philip the Fair. I remember reading about him years back. What a nasty Wall Street broker that man is as well, with far too much wealth and money. And the bloody same thing happened to them. One of the K-lists turned up. I can't remember which one it is offhand. Turned up to take all their money as well. So human nature across the world is united yet again in its misdemeanors, its ignorance, its small-mindedness, and all the rest of it. Oh, John, I think why these mystical groups are always the target of worldly authorities. I mean, certainly the irony being that mystical groups, if they're genuine, normally, not always, but normally tend to attract great material wealth and influence. The two always fit together. You know, so yes, they're a target, but also the idea that, you know, you're not just this limited creature. You're not just a mechanism whirring in a gutter. Actually, there's a lot more to the human condition than that. And that they say they can prove it, you know, do A, B, C, and D, and, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4 will happen. I mean, that, to the vested interest of this world, is a direct challenge and something very, very frightening. I mean, certainly lockdown, is all this unconscious? I don't know. Our British lockdown will happen again on November the 5th, which of course is where Brits remember Guy Fawkes. And what was wrong with that man? You've got a bloody barrel of gunpowder. Why can't you just put it in the right place and blow it up and run off? What is wrong with you, man? So, you know, his masterly attempt to blow up Parliament, which went wrong. But, you know, you can't help feeling, you know, there's a speech delivered. I know it's me being crazy. I know, you know, there's a scary speech delivered on Halloween. There's a lockdown taking place amid remember the 5th of November with gunpowder, treason and plot, you know, embodied in that wonderful movie V for Vendetta, which, well, everyone was telling me about before it came out. I thought, oh, rubbish, I'm not watching that nonsense. But I loved it. When I finally got to see it, I loved every minute, which of course the protagonist wears the mask of Guy Fawkes, is repeating that kid's nursery rhyme all the way through, proves to be a true cavalier for truth and justice. I mean, how is that not attractive? You know, and manages to upset the entire apple cart by bringing some sanity back into the system. We've got to remember the 5th of November. I know it's election time over there soon, so I'm hoping inflammatory statements aren't flowing around too much, but I think they might be. But over here, no, we've got to remember that. We've got to get a new Guy Fawkes, and we've got to give these people a powerfully explosive message that you are meant to be elective representatives, not emperors and mandarins telling us all what to do. So hopefully that will happen. But, you know, with the battle for Christmas raging around me as I sit here, will Brits be able to celebrate Christmas or not? Which, of course, is the last festive time of the year, because are the police really going to raid our homes and break up gatherings of more than 6 people? You know, I despair, John. Remember, we've all got to find a bit of sanity in the present world and treat each other with a bit of respect. God bless America, and if I can get the green card, I'll be across there too. Handing back.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting what's going on over here. These massive rallies for President Trump. He like did 4 of them yesterday. I mean, 4 different cities in one day. I mean, this guy's like, his energy level is through the roof. I've never seen anything like it. What was it? President Polk was like that. He was thoroughly industrious, but he didn't live long. But he managed to make it so that acquisitions happened during his presidency. A great many things. It's definitely worth looking up. But getting into what's going on here, then you go to like a Biden rally or Kamala Harris or even Obama. I mean, they'd have a hard time filling out a high school gymnasium with the kind of people that they, and it's kind of sad because they have these circles drawn on the ground. And you have to go sit in this circle so that the social distancing is in effect and all that. Then you go to the Trump rally and they're all there and they're all cheering and they're all together. And there's a big difference here. But there, with everything that's swirling around the drain in Washington at this time, it's really been brought front and center by Rudy Giuliani, his possession of the drives of the Hunter Biden laptop. That's what's going on here. And I just posted an excerpt from our friend Roseanne Barr. She's interviewing Jack Posobiec from One America Network News, or News Network, OANN, and I would strongly recommend anybody go in there watching the whole thing. But you could see a short 16-minute excerpt on my channel on YouTube, and where he explains, because he actually has a thumb drive with the content of the hard drive in his own possession, as do they sent him out to over 40 different media outlets. Of course, they're just not choosing not to talk about it, which is highly suspect. And all it's done is made people more interested in wanting to find out what's on that thing, right? And so levels and levels of corruption and the worship of mammon, the demon of money, you know, it's like that's at the core of it. Although there's other things just really of a questionable nature of his exploits of drugs and underage, and it's just it just gets so awful. Just the humanity at its worst. And so it's kind of strange when I see people and they're talking about how they already voted and they voted for Biden. I'm thinking, you know, they just really don't know, do they? But I don't want to get into all that political stuff too much here. We're trying to redeem some of the dregs that are floating up from the drain and push them back down where they belong, in the subterranean crypt. Especially around Halloween here, we have to push those back into their realm, get them into the point of latency where they've imprisoned the Rakshasas, as they say in Hindu lore. And you'd have to go back to C.G. Harrison to figure out what I just said in this transcendental universe. But if you get into understanding the parallels between C.G. Harrison's transcendental universe and the occult movement in the 19th century by Rudolf Steiner, he makes a very important point, is that it's within the high church of the Anglican Church, that he said that there were individuals that had far more occult knowledge than even Blavatsky had, Madame Blavatsky, who created Isis Unveiled and the Secret Doctrine. But they wanted to repress knowledge of reincarnation. I mean, that's really a fascinating point. And it's true that it was of value for people to lose touch with that for a time, to at least experience one incarnation where they didn't realize that that's what's going on, and then be able to return to it in a renewed way as we move into the future. But there are forces working within the lodges that wish to repress that knowledge altogether in their effort to put a hold on the evolution of mankind and keep it under their control. And so that's what we're looking at here with this whole idea of the singularity and the Great Reset and Global 2030 and all these UN agendas and like all these people that think that they know what's good for us, squirrely characters like Bill Gates, So it's like, I don't know, and it becomes questionable how far you could pursue the topic without threatening getting blocked altogether. And so, is that the world we want to live in? Well, if that's the world you're comfortable in, then maybe you're going to pull with Joe and Kamala. It's interesting though, because she's her mother's Hindu, and to give her the name Kamala is interesting because Kama means desire, which is perfectly fitting in Sanskrit. Kamala means desire, and La is the root meaning not. So it's supposed to be without desire, but it seems to be the opposite of that, and it's very tricky. And so Washington at this point, like I've made the point repeatedly, is that as recent as 1980, Washington, D.C. was very much in the middle of the country as far as the median income. But currently, it takes turns with San Francisco at being number one in median income in the whole country. So, and you look at it and you go, well, who lives in Washington? It's a bunch of government bureaucrats, politicians, and all of that. Well, how do they get all this money? Where's that coming from? I guess we have to look on the Hunter Biden laptop to figure that out.
Oh, I try and keep away from American politics because I find British politics difficult enough. I must admit, and no one seems to agree with me. I was always in two minds about Jim Carrey. I think you and I have discussed it before, but I still think the funniest thing I've seen so far is him as Joe Biden, that turned this old man into a live wire full of wit and verve. Coming on as a cowboy, shooting the audience and distancing his desk from Trump with a devil-may-care grin on his face. I mean, and I showed my other half that, then I showed him the real Joe Biden, and the reaction was, "Oh my God!" So I still think that's one of the most amazing things I've seen so far. Politics. I mean, yeah, I think it's depressing because there's a normative way as well as a sort of conspiratorial way of seeing what's going on here. I do think there's some sort of conspiracy mindset at work, but that doesn't, of course, necessarily mean anything's conspiratorial in an actual sense. But anyone that knows the British Conservative Party, as I was saying earlier, which is riven down the riddle between the old guard with actually a sense of purpose and morality, and as much as the progressive in me often finds that difficult, at least I respect it and know why they're saying that. And the new guard that cares about nothing apart from money. Any look at what's going on between Boris Johnson, the cabinet, parliament, and the country at the moment, really, if they're my age, can only see the same, or around my age, they can only see the same pattern playing itself out again and again and again. The Conservative Party, the Tory Party protecting itself, because all that ever matters is the Conservative Party. The rest of the world can be burning in hell, but hey, is the Conservative Party being listened to? I mean, that sort of thinking really has to stop. It's not going to stop yet, but there we are. Hindu mysticism. Gosh, I remember majoring in Hinduism for my first degree, and being overwhelmed at all of these wonderful things, which I never quite recovered from. I think I remember coming across sutras and shastras, and my personal tutor, Friedhelm Hardy, a German scholar. He was going to be a Jesuit, I believe. Managed to last 2.5 weeks at a seminary before he told them all to sod off, because he didn't like being told what to think or the way to think it. Ended up my personal tutor, my private tutor at King's, who would constantly be throwing materials at me. You've got to read this. You've got to read this. And I had everything from the Agori ascetics, all the way, the grisly, since we're speaking of Halloween, grisly people that do grisly things on a yearly basis. I mean, half of them live in cemeteries. Some of them are cannibals, and they practice the dark arts for a light purpose. Give me a break, please. No, you don't. You're all swines. So all the way from them to the saintly followers of Krishna, who seem very, very, I'm used to dealing with followers of Krishna. They're the sort of people I know. So who are hardly ever mentioned. All the nasties got a big mention. The lovely little Krishna people hardly ever got a mention. Therefore, the world again never changes. Halloween! You've got me thinking about so many things when it's to do with that. Love this time of year to bits. Still need my pumpkin pie. I still need my Thanksgiving. I still need. Am I going to be discovered to be the witch in the community of the Puritans? I must admit, I used to, a couple of years ago, practice the silence with local Quakers, the meeting in Wandsworth, and I couldn't resist it one year. They were all being so perfect. They are good people. And sometimes people stand up during the silence to pray, and I just couldn't resist it. I said, I'm sorry, I feel like the witch worshipping amongst the Puritans. And you could have heard a penny drop at that particular moment in time. It was just how I felt. It needed saying. Mysticism in the Church of England. I don't think there's anything new about that, and I certainly wouldn't have the temerity to question anyone like Rudolf Steiner. I think he must have had a very generous outlook because I've known people with esoteric stroke occult interest in the Church of England. I'm an admirer of Martin Israel, who was ordained and some would say a practicing esotericist. I'll put my teeth back in. Stroke occultist. Yes, it is feasible to have a Christian occultist. It's feasible. I mean, it's highly unlikely. And what would the conditions be by which you can do honor to both callings and not violence to either in the name of the other one, and particularly in the name of the other one? I think that must be so complex it's untrue, but it is feasible. He certainly claimed he was doing that, and I admire his work a great deal as a healer, a psychic, and an exorcist, and an incredibly serious subject when it's looked at from the correct perspective, which is the perspective of pathology. I'm not saying there aren't unclean energies, dark energies. I'm absolutely convinced there are, but we start looking at those things through the stepping stones of modern psychology, because when you run out of those stepping stones, then you're on safe ground. It's not those other things, therefore it must be something else. Therefore you're dealing with the metaphysical. So I think he had a similar view. Certainly I've never come across overpoweringly knowledgeable esotericists in the Church of England. That's probably where I lack contacts, unlike Dr. Steiner. But normally it's theosophy, and certainly there was a love affair taking place, as you know, John, between the Theosophical Society and the Church of England about a century ago, where they were constantly jumping in and out of each other's beds. And one or two good books got produced, so more power to them. I've never really understood why they didn't get more in bed with anthroposophy, which, is a clearly Christian form of mysticism, a Christian form of esotericism. So it just amazes me. Yeah, I'm thinking of Bishop Wedgwood and all those sort of crypto-Catholic types, and yeah, one or two people I've met who I probably shouldn't mention by name. But, overpowering, I don't know. I think that must be Steiner either being generous or very, very fortunate in meeting those people. Certainly, if they're around now, they've kept themselves very close to the ground, because I can't think of a single name that would surface, which, of course, isn't necessarily good. I mean, I'd rather have those people around for a good Barney, a good row, than having them not there at all. Because, again, you're looking at the commodification of the religious experience, which is happening all around us on a daily basis, and it's only you and I that find that a problem. And it is a problem, and that's why this show has to continue. Handing it back.
Well, that's the thing. Is so many people within the Christian cultural context, shall we say, have a problem with understanding the concepts of Christian occultism, but which is something that I use repeatedly as a description of my particular path. That being said, when you get into the concept of the fallen spirits, Rudolf Steiner is very clear that Jesus Christ is infinitely more powerful than these spirits of opposition. And in taking refuge in Christ, I mean, even in the Muslim community, if they need an exorcism, they have recourse to Christian exorcists. And if you remember, that was one of the functions that Christ performed while he was on earth, was exorcism. And there's the supersensible nature of Christianity. It begs the question: is somebody capable of understanding the depth of Christianity without learning all the various facets of the human mind, consciousness, and the hidden aspects? And all occult means is hidden, right? That's what it means. So now they tend to use the word esoteric because it doesn't have as much stigma attached to it. Like there's something naughty about the word occult, when like an occultation of the sun is an eclipse, when the moon gets in the way of the sun. It's to be blocked from vision, right? So in getting into understanding the esoteric stream of Christianity, I think that if you look at the esoteric stream within Britain, one of its most prominent exponents is James I. I mean, still to this day, his book on demonology is one of the best sources to try and understand what demonology is, and to have it written by a king of England who was also responsible for really the codification of Freemasonry as within the whole kingdom, and also responsible for producing the King James Bible, which is one of the greatest works that's ever been produced. And to be able to democratize the Bible, because remember, within the Roman Church, you weren't even permitted to have a Bible, right? You were supposed to go to church and they told you what to think about what was in the Bible. And most of it would be in Latin, in a language you didn't even know. Personally, I like the Latin Mass. I think it's very profoundly magical, but as far as being understood by its parishioners, not too many of them were versed in Latin. But then you'll find, if you get into studying British history, that many of these people that you run into were not only conversant in Latin, but also ancient Greek. And likewise in Ireland. In fact, the illiteracy that was put upon Ireland through their conquest by the British, I mean, at the time that they suppressed the monasteries in Ireland, I mean, it's said that even common farmers could read and speak Greek and Latin. that Ireland was a seat of great learning, and actually the conversion of Britain occurred as a result of, as we all know, with St. Patrick, right? Who was actually a slave, a British slave that ended up coming to Ireland and finding the faith and then bringing it. And the conversion of Europe was through the Irish travelers that came from Ireland and converted Europe, like St. Gallen in Switzerland, and there's all these various brave souls went out, walked right in the middle of Druid centers, and proclaimed the gospel of Christ. So that's like very profound. But when you get into studying that history, like even William Butler Yeats wrote a piece about Fergus the Druid. And it was about Fergus the Druid. There's this old legend in Ireland that Fergus the Druid was recounting the crucifixion in Ireland from seeing it clairvoyantly while it was occurring in the Holy Land. And actually, Rudolf Steiner makes the point of that's he doesn't mention the Yeatsian version of it, but he mentions that particularly legendary account and said that it was true, that the clairvoyant mysteries that had been established in primal times by Scythianos, that these initiates had the clairvoyant, the etheric clairvoyance, to be able to perceive, and that they were aware of the crucifixion while it occurred. So there's something very profound about the relationship to Christianity and Ireland and the British Isles. But in that establishment, you also have the severance of the Church of England from the Church of Rome, centered around the highly quixotic character, Henry VIII. I mean, he had his own reasons for doing it, but nonetheless, he was no dummy. And so if you read the Lord's Prayer, it's said that the version of the Lord's Prayer that people receive in the Church of England, that the end of the last phrase on the end of the Lord's Prayer was added by Henry VIII. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. And that's his addition on there. So that's an interesting thing. So it's so deep that to get into it. That's why we have so much we could talk about on our little soapbox here, or our pedestal. Our easy chair is probably more apropos. But I just wanted to share some of the insights that I've been finding and renewing myself again to keep these adversarial forces at bay through self-satisfaction in my personal destiny, to keep back Satan, and the humility to keep back Lucifer in the name of Christ. And so if somebody has a fault with my particular Christian past, well, that's part of the beauty of America, is that there is to be no law that's going to prevent the establishment of religion or whatever, wherever you want to approach it from. Quakers, actually, Richard Nixon was a Quaker.
All right, you've finally done it. You've blown my mind. I can't imagine Tricky Dicky as a Quaker. I have a very, when I was very, very young, I think I mentioned it before, and he was very, very old. I met Bertrand Russell, who was from Quaker stock, of course, and did he write a book, Why I'm Not a Christian? Yes, he did. But he could see why people would become Quakers, because I asked him. I know that. I asked him. And, he's from that sort of free church, radical, free-thinking background. No, I think that's one of the strengths of America, getting back to your personal path, that nobody says or can say that that's in error. I think we need much more of that. We need more freedom. We need more liberty. There is no one way of finding Buddha. It's your way of finding Buddha. People haven't got the right and probably not the skill to tell anybody else how to do it. Therefore, I do certainly very clearly come down on that side. I never know what I think of Henry VIII. I mean, how much can a human being physically drink? I mean, that crossed my mind at one point. And how fat was he actually compared to those rather flattering paintings? So that crossed my mind as well. You know, because you can't eat and drink that much without the wear and tear coming through at some point. Oh gosh, John, I'm not. I think, to be fair to the Catholic Church, what they were worried about in terms of everyone having a Bible, and the best description of my own path, I suppose, is a Protestant with a sacramentalist outlook, which has got me into all sorts of trouble and various allegiances through the years, but I still think that's roughly where I hail from. And it's unwise of the Protestant churches to throw away sacramentalism lock, stock, and barrel, because not only are they beautiful, they're actually doing things very differently to Zen. I mean, you know, I like the sort of low church, free church Zen thing, you know, lacquered wood, stark walls, you're thrown on your own resources to find what the spirit is doing within you. That makes complete sense to me, and I think that's beautiful. Also, that said, I can find the sort of Mahayana high church, smells and bells, statues and paintings, literally whipping you up into higher states of consciousness. I can understand all that as well. For me, it's a great shame that it appears to be an either or. Surely that's not what human beings are like. Yeah, some groups will have a propensity one way or the other, but no one should say to anybody else, this is the only way of doing it, because that puts them in the position of the angels. Human beings, by definition, are not angels. So mind your own business and keep out of other people's hair. You know, let them find their way to the kingdom. Love and be free, as St. Augustine said, love and be free. You know, and I think that's another way of saying that sort of Buddhist thing. You know, if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him, which can come as a shock to Westerners until they've sat down and thought about it. You know, because that's somebody else's view. What's your view? Love and be free. That's Augustine saying nearly exactly the same thing in a different and a theistic way. Because I think as long-term listeners to our shows, I hope we have one or two, you know that I don't really regard Buddhism as a philosophy, as a religion, but as a philosophy, with no disrespect to Buddhism at all. It shows how far philosophy can fly, and it shows how beautiful philosophers can be, so, and what they can attain. So, but I find it difficult personally categorizing that as a religion, and of course there are lots of people who would agree with me on that. Christian esotericism, occultism strikes me as that sort of, personally, and I'm probably going to get brickbats thrown at me during the week for saying this, you know, I can see that as part of the whole Mahayana experience. You know, the smells, the bells, the poetry, the potions, the beautiful hand gestures, the vestments. I can see very clearly where I think it fits, and it needs to be explored and rediscovered. Maybe the Catholic types need to remember a little Zen, and the Protestant types need to go a bit wilder sometimes with ritual. Maybe that would help balance this incredibly false dichotomy between paths. You know, we've got to stop assailing each other over such minor differences. You know, what we're talking about is salvation through Christ Jesus, which is bigger than all of us, and that needs to be remembered all the time. The minute we forget that and we start thinking we're in the right and everybody else is in the wrong, that's where the trouble starts. I saw a wonderful meme, is that what they call the wonderful image during the week, which is put outside some sort of, I think it was a Southern Baptist church. I tend to go into, oh my God, anxiety mode every time somebody mentions Southern Baptism to me, simply because they like attacking people like me a lot. So I tend to have this sort of knee-jerk reaction every time that comes up in conversation. But this meme, this sign was spot on. Somebody had put outside one of their churches, love everybody and I'll sort the rest out, signed God. You know, there we are. Bullseye. That's the secret of the Christian path. No, your brand, your particular path, I find intriguing, not simply because you're a friend of mine, but because I can see the value and depth in it. It just makes me sad that there are so many people that are afraid of the Christian paranormal. I mean, as you know, we're trying to arrange the first, hopefully, of a series of conferences on the Nephilim in London next year. I'm hoping we get the resources and can manage to get you across the year after. We try and kidnap you this year, but we won't have the resources because it's the first year of the conference. And already there are silly things being said about that. Apparently, we're a group of psychic activists. I don't know where that came from. I said to somebody the other day, no, we're keeping that in the publicity. That's too good. It was an insult, but it's too good to lose. We've got to, use that one. But we've got an incredible panel which is celebrating. So that might have been clairvoyant. The fact that there are things like Christian views of the paranormal, certain schools, certain movements within Christianity are very open to esotericism, and some of the greatest Christian thinkers have actually been occultists, which is something we forget at our peril. So no, I mean, the whole phenomena of Rudolf Steiner begins to intrigue me more and more. And the fact he's not embraced in the way he really deserves to be. I mean, I know he's a big name and I know he's a huge influence in European society, but I still think he should be held at a much more honorific level. Absolutely flabbergasts me. I mean, the guy's a phenomenon. And if ever there was an initiate, I'll get my teeth back in. It was him. I'll pass it back to you, John, because you're the resident anthroposophist.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, currently I'm an anthroposophist with a small a rather than a capital A, because I've been amiss in maintaining my membership, so to speak. But in the larger context of what we might call the Michaela community, and that's those souls that are pursuing the path toward Christ in the spirit of freedom. And so that can include a great many people, some that you might not expect even. I still remember the look on Galek Rinpoche's face when I told him, I said, Buddha's a Christian now. Which, by the way, he is. But in any event, you'd have to understand what that statement means. I told him, I said, Jesus Christ is the incarnation of Vishvakarman. He gave me this look. He said, no, I never heard that. And so the Christ mystery is a world mystery, and we're not at the stage of our development at this point to be able to take the whole thing in, and that's okay. As I've said before, Rudolf Steiner made the point about the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, that they each approach this Christ mystery from a different vantage point. And there's symbolical representations in the cathedrals in Europe of the symbols of the four fixed signs of the zodiac as representing the four synoptic Gospels. So you have Luke is the bull, right? And that has to do with that will force, so that there's this tremendous the awesome power of the universe as represented in the Gospel of Mark. And then you have the eagle is the high-flying eagle, the high vantage point of the Gospel of John that gives you that perspective. And then you have the Gospel of Luke, which is that's the gentle gospel of the shepherds, and Alleluia, and that's that whole gentle pastoral aspect of the Christ mystery. And then you have the three kings in the Gospel of Matthew, right? And these are completely different perspectives approaching this Christ mystery. And there's more to boot, because remember, there were 12 apostles. And so this thing, will continue to unfold as mankind evolves the capacity. But you get into why isn't Rudolf Steiner appreciated more? And it's interesting because, in case you'll notice, you don't find any like cogent critiques of Rudolf Steiner's work, because the people that think in abstract concepts, they can't get through it. They get to the end of the paragraph and they can't hold a thought in their head. That you have to develop a kind of a new modality of thinking to be able to enter into analogical and layered representational thinking, and working with symbols is very much important for that. You could see that so strongly represented in the works of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and Faust, and is Wilhelm Meister. That's the novel that he wrote. That's basically an initiation novel, and you have there's 2 volumes of it. It's a wonderful excursion that can help give one further questions, and that's what all we're looking for is that we can improve our questions and have a healthy suspension of disbelief. We're not asking anybody to believe these things. It's not so much an attribute of faith. It's more an attribute of being able to think the thought. If you can enter into the thought sufficient enough to understand the thought, that maybe you'll come to the point to where you can actually perceive what's being revealed in that thought. And so that's the criteria that we're looking at, and it's a healthy thing, It's to be able to enter into an understanding of human history and all of that. As I've mentioned before, I spent a lifetime pursuing these things. Created computer relational databases on ancient Egypt and Mesopotamian studies in excess of just thousands of volumes, and then creating a relational database of esoteric literature also as a separate database, and so that in being the manager of the largest metaphysical occult bookstore in the world, I had the opportunity to meet and pursue all these various paths and see how they come together, and I just can't but wonder how that came about, but yet it did. And so all it does is make me more humble, because when I'm confronted with some of these people, and some of them are kind of unusual, like you say with the Agori, since we're on the Halloween thing, they're the charnel houses of the Agori is kind of a strange thing. But if you get it, it's interesting because the concept of Tantra came up on Facebook just this morning, and somebody was asking, well, what's the relationship to that Rudolf Steiner? And I made the point that perhaps the leading representative of Tantra, which is usually equivocated to sexuality, although it's so much more than that, and it has to do with the weaving of the universe, how the universe is woven together, and its most developed expression is in Kashmir and the Kashmir Shaivism, and that the Tantra that's present in Tibetan Buddhism is derivative of this Kashmir Shaivism. And so it was in the 8th and 9th century, during the time in which the cosmic intelligence descended to Earth, that the key exponents of both Advaita Vedanta and also the Kashmir Shaivism of Abhinavagupta and Gaudapada before him. But Abhinavagupta was celibate. So when these people get into like their books about tantric sex and all this kind of stuff, and the sex magic of weird characters like Aleister Crowley, they're not understanding Abhinavagupta. Because he talks about something doesn't mean that he's fallen in that regard. It's because he has that. He also talked about art. He talked about literature and poetry. I mean, there were literally hundreds of volumes he wrote, of which most of them have never been translated. But his main work was Tantraloka, which is the central text of that tradition. And then he gets into, he had more than a dozen gurus that taught him, so that there was parallel developments happening in India while the events were occurring in around the 8th and 9th century. In fact, the Rudolf Steiner did indicate that Charlemagne was an incarnation of a Hindu guru, which is a very interesting indication when you consider that. And then you get into his grandparents, Charibert von Laum, and what was his wife? Bertrada of the Bigfoot, she was called. So you have to wonder what that means. But this whole Grail stream develops through this court of Charlemagne and around and the events following. And so that there's this inner kernel of esoteric impulses that comes through and is carried by the Trouviers and the Troubadours and the Minnesingers of Germany. And so that it's always been there. It's just that it's not that everybody's ready to approach it, and it's nothing. I have friends now, they see some of my podcasts and they had no idea I was into a lot of things because it never came up. I don't bring it up unless it comes up in conversation. So a lot of my musician friends and all that, they're like totally surprised. To tell you the truth, I didn't hide it. It's just if it doesn't come up, there's no context for it to be relevant, right? But that being said, I think I should once again reiterate that you might want to check out David's books, wherever I put them, I don't remember. And oh, here they are. David's books that I forgot to mention that they're available on, that's the front. They're available for you on Amazon, and my two books are available exclusively from me on eBay. I wouldn't go looking for them on Amazon or elsewhere because people are offering them at these ridiculous prices. I see them as high as $1,000, like they're this rare out of print book. Well, you're not going to find them unless you ask me. You might find one, but in any event, I think it would help you to try and comprehend some of the conversations that David and I have here. And it's such a joy to be able to speak with somebody who's so heartfelt and genuine in his pursuit, although he does tend to have a greater fondness for abstract thinking than I do. But yet, at times, I could be apologetic in that regard, too. But if you could, David, perhaps in this fall season, you could share with us a prayer that will lead us towards this most important election in American history.
Oh, but two things before I get to prayer. Love to Roseanne and love to Lowell, in case you ever watch the show. I remember being invited a couple of years back to a group of pagans that lived down the road at this time of year, and I'd always have a bit too much to drink and end up hugging and kissing and everybody. So love to you too at this wonderful time of the year, because it's a magical time. And let's bear in mind, because this is the time of the year where the year gets dark. This is the dark time. That many decisions need to be made in the dark, and we don't always know their outcome. We don't always know where they're leading, but we must make them nevertheless in the light and the hope of a better tomorrow. My friends, viewers, my dear friend John, may the light of angels guide you all in the week ahead, guide your conscience in America to do the right thing as you see it, and let us all keep the faith that ultimately, in the words of John Bunyan, that we need to be of good cheer because all is well. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, my brother. And I look forward to further adventures with you. Say hi to all my friends there in the Isles.